What's happening? Welcome in. Jason Priester, Clemson Insider, right back here with you on this glorious Monday. Well, I hope it's been glorious for you guys because it's not been quite so glorious at my house today. That's a discussion for another day. Appreciate everybody that's tuned in. Also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, A-Glass. 2 locations right here in the PD. Check them out in Florence. Check them out in Sumter. Take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement. They do repair. You can get free quotes. Check them out online, myaglass.com. Well, we're going to put a bow on spring football tonight. So any direction you want to take it regarding football, we'll go there. Any direction you want to take it, period, we'll go there as always. But we're gonna really dive hard into spring football. I think, like I said last week, I thought there were a lot of positives that came out of the spring game. Still, maybe a question or two, but I think for the most part, it was mostly positive. Really did like a lot of what I saw from the defense. You can tell there's been a re-emphasis on the fundamentals. The tackling looks like it's going to be much improved. A couple of guys were talking about it after the game. A couple of those defenders talking about how, they were just freed up. And instead of overthinking things, it just allowed them to play a little more freer, which allows you to just go out and play and make plays. That'll always make you better when you're not overthinking. When you're overthinking, it causes you to get out of position, hit the wrong gap, yada, yada, yada. So I'm expecting a much improved, defense. Saw a lot of good things out of the young defensive tackles, too. I wrote about it the other day. Really liked what I saw from Vic Burley. I thought, I was impressed with Evan Brown-Schuler. Like, for the most part, what I saw from Amari Adams, we touched on him a little bit last week. I think Clemson's going to have a lot of depth there on the interior. With DeMonte Capehart being out and Stephon Green being out all spring long, it kind of freed up a lot of reps for some of those younger guys, and that's only going to benefit a guy like Amari Adams. Burley's kind of had injuries slow his development, missed all of his freshman season, took him a little while to get back kind of into playing form as a sophomore, played less, or a redshirt freshman, played less than 100 snaps last season. He looks like he might be ready to start displaying traits of that guy that most thought he would be when they signed him out of high school. He was a 5-star in the composite, if I'm remembering right. So, I mean, he was a big-time guy coming out of high school, and they've kind of patiently been waiting on him 2 years. But anything you can get from those guys, man, is just going to be gravy when you got starters like Peter Woods, DeMonte Capehart, an experienced guy like Stephon Green behind them. It just allows you to do so much more rotating and keep those guys at the top of the depth chart fresh. Was really encouraged by what I saw at linebacker. You know what you got in Woodaz. You know what you got in Sammy. I think Jeremiah Alexander is still at least partly a little bit of an unknown commodity. Just didn't play a lot of Alabama, but you got to be encouraged by what you saw out of the spring game. I thought D. Creighton looked like he might be much improved, in the spring game. So if you got a couple of backup linebackers that you can really depend on and that you trust, that means you don't have to play Woodaz and Brown basically every snap, every game, the way Clemson's done at linebacker the last few years. Even in blowout games, you see the starting linebackers still out there because they just don't trust the guys behind them. I'm not too worried about corner. I know we didn't see a lot of those guys in the spring game, and they had on non-contact jerseys. But I feel like Avion Terrell is going to have a bounce back season. We saw what he was capable of as a freshman. Thought he had a little bit of a sophomore slump over the back half of last season. I'm extremely high on Ashton Hampton. We saw flashes of it last year. I think you're good at corner. I think you even got some depth there, even though it's even behind Jaden Lucas, who's experienced. There's not a lot of experience behind him. But with guys like Corey and Gibson, I was encouraged by what I saw from Rob Billings in the spring game. Safety, that might be, for me, that might be the biggest question coming out of the spring is who's going to lock that spot up left vacated by R.J. Mickens. I mean, you got one side with Khalil Barnes. You got a lot of options you can run out there at nickel, but that other safety spot, I think that's yet to be determined. Does a guy like Ricardo Jones, kind of step up and fill that void and win that job? Or I think Ronan Hannafin, I've heard a lot of good things about him. Maybe he's a wild card here. I mean, there's some talent in that room. They're just not experienced. I'm a big believer in Ricardo Jones. I think he is going to be a really good player on the back end of this defense. The question is, does he kind of start to hit that ceiling as a sophomore, or does it take him another, a little while to kind of start getting there? Again, we saw flashes out of him last year, and he's a ball hawk. And Hannafin's one of those guys. He just wants to hit somebody. He'll bring a level of physicality to that position. So, to me, that would probably be the biggest question on the defense is who is the safety opposite of Khalil Barnes. And speaking of I lost my train of thought there. Speaking of sophomore slumps, Khalil Barnes had one himself. So he's another guy that kind of needs to rebound. And I think playing in Tom Allen's scheme, which is going to require a lot less. It's not going to be, how can I say this? It's going to be a much more simplified scheme. And I think that'll free up a lot of guys to play closer to their capabilities. Don't have a lot of questions on the offensive side of the ball. You know who your quarterback is. You know who your receivers are. You pretty much know who the offensive linemen are. Not probably the biggest question would be a running back. I thought Gideon Davison looked the part. We talked a lot about him last week. Didn't get to see a ton of Adam Randall. Also said this last week, looks like he might be going to prove me wrong because I thought he might be a guy that could give you 3, 4, 5 carries a game, but he's kind of grabbed the bull by the horns there, man. It looks like he's making a pretty seamless transition, but I thought EZ looked much improved. Still kind of runs too high, which can lead to fumbles, but that's something that can be corrected over time. The question is, where does a guy like Keith Adams or Jarvis Green kind of fit in, and how quickly does Jay Haynes kind of get back into the groove once fall camp rolls around and he's back? How long does it take him to trust that knee? But I thought there were a lot of positives coming out of the spring. And again, I probably, for me, the biggest thing is some of the things you've heard about the defense, and then you actually got to see some of it in the spring game. Again, I was a big fan of the format. I love the fact that they didn't divide the rosters up, and they did one, or the offense versus the defense, and you got to see some good on good, and second string versus second string, and third string versus third string. And it went by so much faster, which is always a positive in my book. You can let me know what you think about the spring game or spring football. Brownell just keeps kind of plugging along there in the transfer portal. Actually added another big today. I figured 3 was going to be what they stopped with, and he went out and added another one. Picked up Jake Whalen out of Utah. He's got 2 years of eligibility left. So, he really kind of took a step forward as a sophomore last year, kind of in season, really started to contribute once they got into conference play, ended up starting 22 games for the Utes. Most of those came in conference play. I mean, his numbers aren't going to jump off the screen at you. He only averaged 6 points, 5 boards, and 1.5 assists per game. Did shoot 35% from beyond the arc, but he's a guy that's probably going to come off the bench for you as a junior anyway. So you don't need him out there averaging 15 points per game. You're going to get that from the other bigs like Davidson and Welling. And added the first guard yesterday. Efren Johnson out of UAB. Another guy whose numbers aren't going to jump off the screen at you. Didn't really shoot the ball well from deep last year, which kind of leads me to believe that Brownell's not done at guard in the portal. Still expecting to add one more shooter, maybe even a specialist, a guy like a Gerard, or what Hybreeder was supposed to be. Didn't turn out that way, but still needs somebody that you can rely on to consistently shoot the 3 ball. And Johnson's not really a guy that's shown the propensity for doing that yet. He's only got 1 season of eligibility left. Spent his first 3 years all at UAB. Dylan Hunter's not a big volume 3 guy. Maybe get some of that from the freshman Zach Foster, but you don't want to have to rely on him to give you all of that. So I still think there's going to be at least one more move to be made. Clemson takes 2 out of 3 from Stanford. Ethan Darden gets knocked around again. I've kind of been giving him the benefit of the doubt. I've talked about how he didn't get any help from his defense at Georgia Tech. Didn't get any help. He should have been out of that inning against Stanford too. But at some point, you got to be able to pitch around an error. And he's really kind of struggling in that regard right now. If it doesn't all go according to plan and the opponent puts a base runner or 2 on, that's when he really starts to struggle, and that's when you need your starters to buckle down. It's going to be interesting to see, how the staff handles it. They've already had a Sunday starter issue that they had to work through and get fixed. And yes, I still think they've got that fixed. I get it. BJ got knocked around a little bit yesterday. That's going to happen. And that's a team that hits the ball really well. I mean, if you watch those 3 games this year, that was pretty dang evident. Hitting has not been their problem. Their pitching has kind of been the problem. And, man, they had a lot of 2-out success. Clemson, not so much. They did hit better with runners in scoring position this weekend, so that's a good sign. Colin Priest continues to show signs that he's coming out of it. Same with Josh Pano. Gerald's kind of finding that power stroke, but the question becomes, how long is Ethan Darden's leash from here on out? And if you decide to make a change, who's it going to be? Because you've already made one and took one of your better relievers out of the bullpen and BJ Bailey. Unless you can somehow get Talon Bell stretched out really quick, because he's not there yet. He's not throwing more than 50 pitches in a game yet. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. We'll see if they decide to try something different or give Darden another shot this week. It's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series, no game on Easter. And they did change the time of Friday's game from 7 to 5 p.m. Wow, that might have been – I'm trying to keep it short here in the opening, man. That might have been the longest one yet. Daddy's got to get his recruiting update. Gordon Sellers is going to announce a commitment Friday. He was at Clemson for the spring game. Second time he visited Clemson this spring. He visited Ohio State and Michigan earlier in the spring. Both those are finalists along with South Carolina. That is where he was this past weekend. Now there's been a new development here. Notre Dame offered him last week, and now he's going to go to South Bend tomorrow. To me, that's they're kind of getting in this thing a little late. We'll see if they can make any headway with him. But if you're a Clemson fan right now, this is one I'd feel pretty good about. I definitely wouldn't say it's a lock by any stretch, because if he's taking a visit tomorrow, that tells you he's not fully decided yet. But I don't think South Carolina did enough over the weekend to take the lead or anything like that. So I still think Clemson's in a really good spot. You had a couple of guys who had Clemson offers commit over the weekend, but one of them was defensive end Kamarian Johnson, who just picked up an offer. Might have been at the Elite Retreat back in March, but a guy, he committed to Alabama. Alabama's kind of always had the momentum there. And then Jalen McGill committed again. Anybody who follows recruiting probably saw he committed to Rutgers earlier this year. 3 weeks later, he decommits and opens it back up. He was at a Clemson spring practice, and I've not really talked about it because I just don't think he was a take anymore. Clemson pretty much lets anybody that wants to come visit for spring practice, they pretty much will let you. So I didn't really take that as a sign that they were ramping things back up with him. So that's why I hadn't really talked about him much of late. Their top two targets are going to be Jay Lamar and Carson Baker, and both those guys are expected here for the big official visit weekend. I talked on the phone today to offensive lineman Mitchell Smith. Picked up his offer at the spring game. Actually visited twice during the spring. Those were his first two visits that he'd ever made to Clemson. And I do believe Clemson's got a seat at the table here with this one now. Need to find. See, I'm not as worried about the starting pitching. Again, I don't think people realize exactly how good of a team Stanford is offensively. I don't care how many ACC games they lost in a row. It's a team that started the season out on fire. They were ranked at one point. It's baseball. You're going to have guys getting hit around sometimes. So I'm not too worried about BJ Bailey. I am starting to get there with Darden. And I've kind of been giving him the benefit of the doubt. I kept thinking he's going to come out of it. But he got teed off again on Saturday, and I know there was a bad error that led to several unearned runs. Um, Sometimes you got to be able to pitch around those things, and Darden's not shown the propensity to be able to do that. Not recently, anyways. He just seems like the ball's getting left up a little too much, or he's leaving the ball up over the plate a little too often, and teams are making him pay. And he's not an overpowering guy. He's going to pitch to contact, and if he's leaving it up in the play, leaving it up in the zone, that's when he's going to get in trouble. I don't know. Haven't already seen that LeGuernick is not ready for that kind of spot, and haven't already taken Bailey out of the pen. I don't know who you would turn to next unless you wanted to go give a guy like Titsworth a shot. And he's kind of been up and down lately. Up during the midweek, then he gets a little shaky on the weekends. I don't know how comfortable I'd be with that. And you really don't want to have to move a guy like Garris out of that bullpen. Again, like I said a minute ago, maybe the best case scenario, you don't have a midweek game this week. Somehow, some way, maybe you get Talon Bell stretched out, and if you gotta make a change or you want to make a change and you're looking for somebody to give an opportunity, give him one. Yeah, I didn't really talk about tight end. We just didn't really see much of them. Who's my starter? Olsen Pat Henry. We'll see if he's able to hold off Bettencure, all season long. He probably can, but I think you're going to see a lot of both those guys. As I think Bettencure's after redshirting last year, I think he's in a spot where he's ready to contribute. But at the other safety spot opposite of Barnes, man, I'd probably roll with Ricardo Jones at this point. But we still got a long ways to week one. Any portal sign? If we're talking about football, I wouldn't get all amped up about hoping for any additions. I just don't know that I see it unless you start seeing some guys leave, and I don't know that I'm expecting very many to leave. I could see one of those running backs maybe deciding to go look for more playing time somewhere else because there's going to be an odd man out, maybe two. Are they content, to ride the pine another year and watch Gideon Davidson kind of assume that role? I don't know that they all will be. We'll see what happens. But I don't know. I don't know that I expect a whole lot of departures. If there's one area that I think kind of needs to be addressed, talked about it last week, it might be punter. Jack Smith was not very good in the spring game. McCune was not. He only punted once, but he didn't look much better. I definitely think that's a weak spot right now. We'll see if Dabo decides to go that route. Elephant in the room. How much is Dabo willing to spend to get Nico? I think Nico's probably gonna find out that nobody's gonna pay him the money he was asking for. It's kind of come out publicly now, but I kind of heard some rumblings at the end of the year that he was already, making waves about wanting more money. And we're talking about a guy that supposedly now there's no way to verify this, but supposedly signed a $8 million deal coming out of high school for 3 years. A lot of these numbers come from some of these reporters that they cover a lot of NIL stuff and they're really in with the agents. So some of these numbers I'm wary of. because they're coming from the agents and not the school, and the agent's always going to want to give you the inflated amount. But that's kind of irrelevant to the discussion. But, I remember when Nico came to camp at Clemson. I can't remember what summer it was. It was the same summer Mateo Iamaleava came and camped at Clemson. So Big Dave and Nico's dad and those two guys came and worked out at camp. And I got to talk to Nico's dad some that day, and I ended up talking on the phone to Nico that night or afternoon or maybe the next day. But I always got the impression that Nico was a good kid. I just think he's getting some bad advice, man. It looks like he's going to end up in North Carolina. I doubt very seriously they're going to pay him $4 million. But he doesn't have a lot of options now. Pretty much everybody's got their quarterback situated. He doesn't have a lot of leverage. He bluffed, and his bluff got called, and here we are. But he's a kid. I think he's got a lot of talent. He's not tapped into it yet. He kind of had his up and downs last year. Got exposed in the bowl game. He's got a lot of arm talent anyways. He can sling it, that's for sure. But can't transfer to an SEC school because there's a rule in place stating if you are at an SEC school and you enter the portal in the spring window and you transfer to another SEC school, you got to sit out that year. I'm surprised that hasn't been, somebody hadn't sued about that yet. Probably coming at some point, but as of right now, no one has. But so his options so far look to be North Carolina, Tulane, and UCLA. So again, he doesn't have a lot of options, doesn't have a lot of leverage. I'd kind of like to see him end up in North Carolina. Clemson's got to make that trip there this season. Defensive end looks like TJ Helton and Lawson then, who is the next backup best guess. Probably Denoff, which I think is fine. I think where you get in trouble is when you start relying on guys like Lawson and Denoff to play starter snaps. Let's don't discount Darian Mayo, maybe working his way into rotation too, because he looks like he's taking a big jump. But as long as you can keep TJ Parker and Will healthy, and you can just use Lawson situationally and Denoff when you need to give those guys a breather, I think you're okay. It's when you have to. We saw it last year. It's when those guys are forced into starting roles is kind of when they get exposed. But the big key would be keeping those top two healthy. That's for sure. But yeah, I would guess Denoff would be the next in line. But I think Mayo's a guy to watch, man. Even Dabo mentioned him by name after the spring game, and I thought he was one of the guys in the spring game that looked like they had taken that next step. Dabo wasn't too positive on the quarterback room behind the starters in his spring practice presser. Says they're nowhere near ready. Name anything. Yeah, I'm not too concerned about some of those guys, man. I'm just not. Some of them are just kind of starting to get into the groove of things, though. A guy like Corian Gibson, who spent a part of last year hurt and redshirted, he wasn't able to fully acclimate as a freshman. I mean, that was a big-time guy coming out of high school. You know what you got in Terrell. You know what you got in Hampton. Again, I thought Billings looked pretty solid in the spring game. I can't remember all those guys' names off the top of my head. Let's see here. I might can pull them up right fast. But, I've talked about this on here before. I think about 98% of what Dabo says is for a specific purpose. 9 times out of 10 for motivational purposes. I think he wanted to challenge those guys. And yeah, he said it a couple times. But there's a lot of inexperience, behind those starters and Jaden Lucas. And now you lost one to the portal already in Tavoy Fegan, who he probably would have been 5th or 6th on the depth chart. Again, I think Corey and Gibson's going to be fine, and I think Clemson's going to have 4 corners they can rely on this year. Especially with the 2025 secondary decommit. See, to me, that doesn't have any impact on what happens this year. Because I don't think any of those guys were coming in and winning spots as starters. I don't know that any of them. Maybe Tay Harris was a guy that could have come in and won a job as a backup, because I am a big believer in him. But the rest of them, I don't know that any of them were contributing right away. I just think there's that much talent in front of them. So, I don't think that has much of an impact this year. Wonder if Randall wasn't in much because a lot of his usage will be trick plays. I don't think so. I just think you don't want to get him hurt. I think that's why, some of the starters didn't play much, and you want to see the guys behind them. You want to get those guys reps, and like Dabo says, want to put some stress on them and see how they respond. I'm kind of, January, February, I'm kind of in the same boat you are. I'm just not kind of buying all this Adam Randall as the starting running back. But I'm telling you, the deeper we got to the spring, the more I heard that was really positive, and the more I'm starting to buy in now. Sometimes I get them wrong, and he might be one I got wrong on here. I am curious to see how long he can hold Gideon off, though, and how much Gideon factors in, because I don't think he's a guy. I think he's going to be a guy that's hard to keep off the field. But man, it sounds like Adam Randall has really taken to this new position, and he's and again, said a minute ago, the transition's been pretty smooth. And count me as one that's been surprised. I didn't know it would take that way. What's your opinion on the baseball series this weekend with Stanford? Not sure how they had an 11-game losing streak. The way they hit the ball looks like Kanak is the only dependable starting pitcher in the start. See, Bailey's had one bad start. The guy, even after Saturday, his ERA is still 2.92. He had a bad game against a team that can smack the ball, man. I'm not too worried about him. I've seen him pitch too much this year, and I've seen him be effective every time, but that once. I just think he'll be fine. That was his. God, I can't count them up, man. There's too many. But that was his 3rd start now. He went 6 2/3 the first time. Went 5 1/3 the second time. Only lasted 4 last time. Give up 7 earned runs. But sometimes a guy just doesn't have it. Just sometimes a guy just doesn't have it, and it's only the second time all year that he's given up more than a run in any appearance. So I would just caution against pushing the panic button on him just yet. But yeah, you got to start wondering about the Saturday guy. Dabo once again proven right with the Nico debacle. Press won't give him credit. Nah. Sounds like Dad is getting Dad kind of earned the negative attention, man. When the first report came out Thursday, and it was from the guy on three, Peter Nakos. He was the first one to report it that I saw, and it didn't take long for Nico's dad to jump on Twitter and call him, call him a bitch and call him a liar. Just went after him, man. And it's been, the next morning is proven that the report's accurate. And Dad's gone radio silent, hasn't said a word. So he's kind of earned it. And he's kind of serving as the kid's agent. And again, it's come out now that there were some issues back, during the playoff. And he's intimating to them that he might consider sitting out a playoff game. I have a hard time believing the kid made those decisions on his own. I just think he's getting some bad advice, and I know Dad's probably doing what he thinks best. But I just don't know that most fathers are, since they're so emotionally invested and emotionally tied into their kid's future. I just think you're better off having somebody that's, they have no biases, they see clearly, and you need to hire some kind of agent or lawyer or something to handle these things, man, or otherwise the potential's there for it to become a disaster, and that's what happened here, just a absolute disaster, and it probably. My guess is that Nico had decided Thursday night he was done and he was leaving already. And he probably had already decided that before the reports came out that Tennessee was moving on. We talked about this a little bit the other day. I did with somebody else in a conversation, and I think it was on the message board on the site too. And my bet is that Nico had already decided to move into the portal, and Tennessee did just a fantastic spin job of talking about how they moved on. But it is what it is. Either way, you get the same result. Now that's just until we get to a point where we get some collective bargaining, and I don't know that that's going to happen for a while yet. It might not be. I've said it many times. I think a break's coming, and football is going to go off into its own thing. And I'm kind of eyeing the next a timeline of the next television negotiations, and that might be when some of this stuff starts happening. But the way it's working now, where the player has all the leverage and the school has none, and it's free agency year after year after year, and so many schools are having to rebuild their roster year after year after year. It's just not sustainable. Am I a big fan of a huge game as an opener? The Georgias, the LSU types. I love they play. Just maybe not as an opener. I understand it's an opener for both. I actually do kind of like it, but I absolutely see the cons that come along with it. Because another thing Dabo Sweeney's mentioned a bunch of times over the years is how, college teams don't get a preseason. They don't get to scrimmage against other teams. So, game one, it's everything is live bullets. The bright lights are already on, and there's a lot of things you still don't know about your team. Just from just a fan of college football standpoint, I like the big openers. I think they create better storylines and those kind of things. But if I'm a coach or in that profession in some way, I'm probably wanting to open with Furman or Citadel or Wofford because that way you can expose some guys and get some things on tape, and you know exactly where you got a weakness or where you don't. There's a lot of things you can work out and play in an opener against an overmatched opponent that way. So I absolutely see that side. But just as a general fan, just taking the jobs and everything out of, yeah, I love to pick game openers. What type of role will Gillen have once fully back acclimated? I don't. He was always a reliever at Seton Hall, a back end guy. His career ERA is under 2. He had a bunch of saves while he was there, so he was a back end high leverage reliever. I know Bakich in the preseason mentioned his name at least once, maybe twice, when he started talking about potential starters. But he always names off a bunch of names every season as guys that could potentially start. So that's wasn't anything out of the ordinary. He's not a guy that's started at the collegiate level ever in his career. So I kind of see him at least starting there. Um, at this point in the season, it's even if you want to bring him in as a starter, man, it's going to be hard, especially as slow as they're bringing along some of these guys that are coming back from injury. You look at Brendan Bennett and Tickle Tiger. I have found out he has. I don't know if he's been shut down, but it didn't sound good the other night. Um, he's definitely dealing with something. But you look at guys like Brendan Bennett and Talon Bell, and the way how slowly they brought him along, those guys along. Just Bell specifically, he's made 3 starts now, and his pitch count's going up by 10 total. Um, so I just don't know that I would see Gillen in any other role but a relief guy for this season. He's got another season of eligibility left, so next year, who knows? But when I start thinking about the rotation next year, I start thinking Knopp, Dane Moeller, and Talon Bell. Um, with a guy like Gillen, coming out of the pen and being your high leverage guy, but got to get him back and got to get him stretched out first and foremost because they could use another arm for the stretch run, and he's a good one to have if you can get him back. Packett said he threw a simulated game last week, so I'm willing to bet he's on the verge of, as long as he hasn't had a setback, that we're on the verge of seeing him at some point in the very near future. I remember I said right before Talon Bell made his first start that I thought Gillen would be about a month behind, and we're right about a month now. Yep, Nico and DJ are cousins. Yes, I thought Strozier did show some flashes too. You know what? I was saying Billings earlier, but it was Strozier I was talking about. I'm glad you said that. Sometimes I get these guys confused in my head, but Strozier's actually the guy I was meaning to say when I was saying Billings earlier. Um, and Miles Oliver actually finally got on the field. A guy that's been hurt since he got to Clemson. So, I mean, we'll see if he has any role this year. But Yeah, I thought Strozier showed some signs of taking another jump this year. Kind of nervous. Keith Adams might be hitting the port. I could absolutely see it, but you know, this is what his fourth year now. It's his third or fourth year. I want to say fourth. Um, Either way, when Maffa was so beat up last year, and the coaches didn't give Adams any opportunity at all, that spoke volumes to me. It just spoke volumes. You heard Dabo talking about the running backs after the spring game the other day. At first he doesn't even mention Adams. I don't even think he mentioned Adams until somebody asked him about Jeremiah Alexander. And when he mentioned Adams, he started talking about the hit Alexander put on him. When he was talking about the running backs originally, he was talking about Gideon and Randall and Jarvis Green and EZ. So I don't know that there's there ain't no other way to say it. I just don't know that there's a role for Adams. Um, so he's definitely a guy I would keep an eye on. Randall had a few plays against Texas that very much looked like a really good running back was in there. I would not be shocked to see him flourish after an off season at the position. Yeah, I was very encouraged. I mean, let me rephrase that. I've been very encouraged by some of the things I've heard about Adam Randall throughout the spring. A lot of it came the last week of spring practice when I was up there, but you know, there wasn't a he didn't play a ton in the spring game, so there wasn't a whole lot to go off of. But when he is in there, I kind of agree. He kind of looks like a natural. He doesn't he might not look like your prototypical running back, but I mean I think he's going to prove to be more than serviceable. I think he's going to prove me dead wrong. I'm kind of changing my opinion now, but I originally didn't think he was going to offer a whole lot. Maybe a change of pace guy, 3, 4, 5 carries a game, but I'm coming off that now, man. I think he's going to be a big part of it, and I'm not going to be so fast to predict that Davidson steals that job from him. I had originally said I could see Davidson winning in game one. Maybe not. I'm telling you, I've heard a lot of really good things about Adam Randall this spring. Do you think with OSU trending towards a 5-star running back, Clemson will land Carson Baker? I don't think what Ohio State does factors into it at all, but Clemson's chasing Baker and Lamar, and probably, you know, for me, I've had conversations with both those guys, and for me, I probably give them a better shot at landing the Lamar kid. Um, I know they really made an impression when he came and visited, um, but George is in hot pursuit too, and he's from the state of Georgia, and Georgia's kind of his dream school and all that. So he's not going to be an easy pull. Both those guys are supposed to be back for the big official visit weekend. We'll see. I think if you can land either one of those guys, you're should be thrilled. I don't think it matters which one, but again, if I had to sit here today and guess which one they had a better shot with. It's probably Lamar, because in a conversation I had with him after his Clemson visit, he told me Clemson was his leader. I also talked to him that morning as he was leaving his visit and driving back home, so you got to account for some visit high in there. And he has since done another interview saying he doesn't have a leader. So, which to me is very smart. You don't want to tip your hand no matter who you might be leaning towards. It's going to be a battle to win that one. I would probably, if they miss on both, we'll see what's still out there. A guy like C.J. Givers is somebody that they've kind of been, they hadn't offered, but he's been on the radar. Maybe Jay Allen Terry. He's another guy, another running back that visited this spring. So we'll see if they can land one of those guys. How is Davidson with pass catching? I thought he showed some of. Well, I keep forgetting that it wasn't on television. He showed off his hand some in the spring game. He was known for being a pass catcher out of the backfield in high school. That was something he's definitely able to do. His biggest thing is going to be, and this is the same case with pretty much every freshman running back, is getting the pass protections down and making sure you don't get your quarterback killed. That's heck, there's been a lot of comparisons to Travis Etienne, and I'm not big on player comps, but even Etienne, for as great as he was, heck, he was into his sophomore season before he really started to make some improvements with his pass pro. He was not very good at it as a freshman. Didn't stop him from getting on the field, obviously. But it's just that's one thing worth keeping an eye on. But I know I kind of got off the subject there, but yeah, he's one of those well-rounded backs that can give you a little bit of everything. Denson's best pass was to David. Yes, it was. He had a couple of really good. I didn't mention him in the opening, but I was impressed by what I saw from Denson. I've had some people say, I've seen some comments on Facebook and Twitter, and more than one or two about how Denson should be the backup. And these are from people that weren't even at the spring game and have never laid eyes on him. Denson should be the backup, not Vazina. And I just kind of get a chuckle out of those things. But you can tell he's there's something to work with there. Um, he I remember the first practice. If you've watched this before, you probably heard me say this before. But the first practice we were allowed to watch, some of the first practice that we had a viewing window in this year, I spent some time watching Denson, and the ball was kind of coming out of his hand wobbly. It just weren't very tight spirals. Thought he looked better the next day when we were in there, or the day after. But I thought he looked a lot more poised during the spring game. He still needs to add some strength. Dabo touched on that after the game, actually talking about how he needs to get stronger in his bottom half so he can, you know, add to his arm strength because he doesn't have the strongest of arms. The ball kind of just floats out there a little bit, but he made a couple of solid throws in that game, man. There's a lot to like about him, man. They might have found a diamond in the rough there. do feel sorry for Nico. It's one thing to tell an agent to get bent. It's another to have to deal with and potentially fight your father. I haven't, some of the things I've heard over the past few days, he gets my sympathy, man. Kind of the same way with some of the things that DJ had to deal with his dad while he was here. And there's a lot of stuff that went on there that most of the fans out there have no idea about. Most people have no idea what that guy was dealing with while he was at Clemson. But yeah, I think for me, anyways, just based on everything I know and everything I've heard, it sounds like pretty much most of the blame lies on Dad's shoulders, and you hate to see that. Darden seems to get better after an inning two. The trouble is getting past the first. that is a very good point, man. He has had some early inning issues in the past, and he tends to settle down and get dialed in. He's not had the opportunity to do that of late because he doesn't get out of the second. He only went, he did pitch well last weekend. Let's not forget that. He went 6 innings, 3 runs, 5 hits, but before that, he only went 3 2/3 against Georgia Tech. And granted, he should have been out of that 4th inning, where they really hit him hard and scored all those runs, or in whatever maybe it was in the 3rd inning. I think it was in the 3rd inning that he should have been out of. They made a couple of, as a matter of fact, it was Payno made a couple of defensive miscues that extended that inning multiple times. But, it is what it is. He only went 2 2/3 against Wake Forest, only went 4 against Notre Dame. 3 of his last 4 starts have not been very good. Here's his last 4 starts. 2 2/3 against Wake Forest. 8 runs on 9 hits. 6 of them were earned. 3 2/3 against Georgia Tech. Might have been the Wake Forest game that I'm talking about with the defensive miscues. I think it was. Anyways, 3 2/3 against Georgia Tech. 9 runs, 10 hits. And last week, 6 innings against Cal. 3 runs, 5 hits. And then yesterday, inning and 2/3. 5 runs on 6 hits. Again, a couple of those were unearned due to the misplayed ball. I didn't see the first 2 innings, so I didn't see what happened when in right field there. I just know Wentworth missed one or dropped one. The box score said he dropped it. That is a very valid point. Matter of fact, that's something Eric Backett just talked about a couple of times this season already, how Darden's been a guy that's been known to get into some trouble in early innings, and if he can get out of those, then he gets settled in and dials in. Do I think Cade is an NFL caliber quarterback or backup? I'm kind of undecided on that. He's definitely going to have a career in the NFL. And we're starting to see the game gravitate to quarterbacks that kind of fit his mold. So he's going to get an opportunity. He's going to get an opportunity to be a starter, assuming that he doesn't just crap the bed as a senior. Anyways, he'll probably be a pretty decent draft pick. I'm not saying he'll be a first round or anything, but he's going to get drafted probably in a decent spot. He's going to get the opportunity at some point, maybe not right away, but it'll be up to him to make the most of it. I would have said definitely no a year ago because I didn't think he had the arm strength to make all the throws the way he can make them. He was able to make them at the collegiate level, but he was not able to make them in a way that he would have needed to be successful at the NFL level. I think his arm's stronger now. So I don't think that's the concern that was there a year ago. You watch him throw some of the balls his first 2 seasons, they just kind of look like rainbows. We talked about it on here before. And there's just not a lot of zip on the ball when he's throwing it deep. That wasn't the case Saturday out there in pregame, man. A few of those deep balls he threw had plenty of oomph on them. And they were not overarching or high overarching passes where, a DB's going to have time to recover and get to it. So I think he's made some improvements there. But, I would lean towards saying yes more so than no now, just based off the improvements we've seen and the way the NFL game is right now. Henderson. Yeah, I'm not going to get into this, but another thing I would lean towards saying is we probably never see Marquez Henderson play a snap in a Clemson jersey. Keith Adams could probably do himself some good playing for Tony Elliott or some Sunbelt teams that need a lot of running backs. Yeah, I kind of I hate to say it because it kind of sounds like I'm knocking on him, and I don't mean to be. But I just don't know that he's a high-end Power 5 back. Not at every down one anyway. Maybe if you want to use him as a short yardage specialist, goal line specialist, he had the opportunity to do that against Texas last year. And if you go back and watch it, it looks like he hit the wrong hole or hesitated or something. I can't remember specifically, but he didn't really run the play the way it looked like it was designed to be run. But it's really small sample size, but still. When you look at the other running backs on the roster, I don't know what kind of role I see for him at Clemson, man. It would definitely be understandable if he wanted to go look for some more playing time elsewhere. Clemson wins against FSU in 2023 if Maffa picks up that place. Probably. Yeah, it just and I know this is the point you're making, but it just goes to show you how important that aspect is for a running back. What class? He's 2026. Keith Adams is better than Adam Randall. Randall just had more opportunities. Yeah, I don't know that I could agree with Randall having more opportunities. The guy's only played one running back for one game and only had a handful of carries. Adams has definitely had more opportunities than Randall has at running back. I think if he was better than Randall, then he'd be the guy getting the bulk of the work during the spring. I've said this many times before, man. I think Dabo Swinney and that staff runs out the guys out there they think gives them the best chance to win. Period. I don't think anybody's getting intentionally sat on the bench that is better than somebody in front of them, if that makes sense. I don't think they're intentionally sitting a guy on the bench that they know is better than the guy in front of them just because. I wholeheartedly believe that they routinely run the guys out there they think give them the best opportunity to win. Maybe it doesn't always work out that way, and Like they say, hindsight's 2020. But Keith Adams was actually getting a lot of the getting a lot of the second string reps early in the spring, and by the end of spring he wasn't. Yeah, Tate Reynolds is a 2026 guy, and he's I think he's going to be a good one. Um, he's kind of flew under the radar to a degree for a lot of his recruitment. Clemson got in on him early, came out to camp here last year and worked out in the summer and just killed it. And that was who Garrett Riley wanted, and it didn't take him long for him to get a commitment from him. I think he's a guy that's going to blow up as a senior. Um, and I lean towards thinking Clemson will be able to keep him in the fold, but never say never these days. You never know what's going to happen. But if that guy gets on campus and he does what he says he's going to, and the plan remains for him to play football first and foremost over baseball, I think he's got the potential to be a really good quarterback. Um, if you haven't watched his film, I suggest go cut it on. He's he's got some of those intangibles that you see in some of the special guys. I mean, his his thighs are about, man, they look like tree trunks. He's built like a tank. Um, there's a lot to really like about him. Here's a good point. If Keith Adams was better than Adam Randall, then we wouldn't have had a guy in there against Texas with very few plays learned over him, and we definitely would not even be. Yeah, I tend to lean this way too, man. If Keith Adams was that guy, then you don't have to move Randall to running back for Texas. Again, I've heard that they taught him 4 plays and no pass protection. So to me, that, yeah, telltale sign. Do I think Cam will stay in the 2 spot in the lineup? I like it, but also concern purifies more like the K watching. I kind of like Cam in the 2 hole. But if Priest is gonna start playing or continue playing the way he's played the last 10 days, 2 weeks, you know, if you want to move Cam back down, fine. But if Cam's going to be in the 3 hole, there's got to be somebody behind him that can protect him. And, when he's been in the 3 hole this year, they've just not had it. They've kept Priest at DH for so long through his struggles, and, Cam just wasn't seeing any pitches to hit. Then they moved Priest and put Gaffney in the cleanup spot behind Cam, and then all of a sudden Gaffney goes cold after he was on a nice little run there. So I just think this is something else they're tinkering with. And I remember Jack Leggett used to say you spend the first 20 games trying to find the right pieces, and then you spend the last 20 games or whatever it is trying to fine tune those pieces and get them in the right spots. As we sit here today, I would have a bigger concern about the Saturday spot, and maybe who's playing right field, because there's a revolving door out there. Nobody wants to grab that job out of horns and win it. So much so that they gave a true freshman 2 opportunities over the weekend. But I think we've seen Cam in the 2 hole 3 games in a row now. I think it worked out well Friday. I think he was 0 for Saturday, and I think he had a couple more hits yesterday. But yeah, a lot of that's about what Purify is going to do behind him, because if Purify is not going to give him protection back there, if he's not going to give Canarella the protection, then it's all moot anyways. But I do kind of like the idea, as long as Purify kind of keeps hitting the way he's been hitting for most of the season. Yes. It will. The baseball show is going to air on Wednesday. Right now, the plan is for us to do it live at 7. But if for some reason we can't do it live, we're going to record it earlier in the day and post it at 7. So either way, we're going to it'll post sometime Wednesday. Whether it's live or not, I don't know yet. I'm leaning towards thinking it will be, and assuming Ashby doesn't have any scheduling conflicts next week, we'll do the same thing next week, because there's a Thursday Friday series next week too at Raleigh. It's fixing to get real for this Clemson baseball team. They got 3 against Louisville, who's been hot lately. This weekend, go to North Carolina State next weekend. Then it's down to Tallahassee for a big one against Florida State. Can't wait for that one. Aiden Canuck versus Jamie Arnold, man. Arnold, who's 2 of the best pitchers in the ACC. So 3 big series coming up in a row here. Yes, I am supposed to be at all 3 Louisville games, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. That is the plan as we sit here right now on Monday night at 10 after 8. Subject to change. You never know, but as far as I know, I shall be there. Anybody needs a ticket to those games, I have one to each one. Shoot me a DM on Twitter or Facebook and you can have it. How do I feel about Wentworth? I was glad to see him get an opportunity, because like I said a minute ago, none of those other guys, Crichton or Becerra especially, they've not really seized the job. They haven't seized the opportunity. McClatty's probably been the best of the bunch, but he's been up and down, and he's not the strongest of defenders out there. I think he's much better defensively in the infield than he is out there in the outfield. But having said all that, I don't know that Wentworth's ready for an everyday role quite yet. Again, I didn't see the play, what happened with him in right field the other day in his error. So I don't know if it was a brain fart or a tough play or whatever. I just know it went down as a drop ball. And even though I know he's not had a lot of opportunities. He just, he's 3 of 16 at the plate. For comparison's sake, McClatty is hitting 271. Even Becerra's hitting 230. Wentworth's at 188. And Crichton is at 293. Crichton's coming off a stretch before this weekend where he had 0 hits in 9 of his last 10 games. If for me right now, I'd personally rather see Crichton or McClatty. But that's just me. But I do think Whitworth's going to be a household name in the Clemson fan base. Probably maybe as soon as next year. I mean, that's a guy that can do a pitch and play the field, kind of a la Caden Grice. So he is definitely a name that you need to file away for the future. One or two players left on the transfer portal. Yeah, I'm not sure what you're asking me. If you're talking about the basketball portal, man, there's a bunch of guys still available. And I don't know that there is one top target. You can go after multiple guys at once. You don't have to just zero in on one. I would definitely look for them to add at least one more guard. You need a guy that you can depend on from behind the arc, from 3-point land. Dylan Hunter's not a volume guy from three. The Ephraim Johnson kid that committed yesterday, he's not a great 3-point shooter. Doesn't shoot a lot of threes. Zach Foster could be a wild card, the incoming freshman, but I think you need a veteran there to kind of bridge that gap. I think you gotta look at least one more guard. All right, there you go. Wentworth got fooled by the wind, couldn't compensate at the last minute. How many more players do you think Brad is going for? I know they are targeting another center and a guard. So you got it. I think the chances of Zachary coming back are probably not very good. I have a hard time seeing him get a waiver. He'll probably have to file suit of some kind. So I think somebody in his same position already filed suit last week looking for their year back. So we'll see how that plays out. But you have to prepare as if he's not coming back. I think Clemson's done in the front court. They've already added 4 bigs. I don't think they're going to add a 5th. But they've only added 1 guard. And I think you need at least 1 more. It wouldn't hurt my feelings to see them grab 2 more. So I would say at least 1 or 2 more, and I would expect both of them to be, whoever else they go after to be guards. Like I said a minute ago, I think you need a guy that you can, maybe in the mold of a what Hybreeder was supposed to be, what Gerard was, somebody that can give you volume threes. And I don't know that any of those guys on the roster right now are that guy. What Dylan brings defensively. Zach Foster's going to be a freshman. Freshmen tend to be a little up and down with their defense in their first year at Clemson under Brownell. Just depends on who we're talking about. But, and don't know what you get. I don't know what you're going to get from the guard they just took yesterday on the defensive end. I'm not that familiar with him yet, but I still think you need a guy that can shoot from the perimeter consistently, make shots from the perimeter. Now, let's don't say shoot from the perimeter. Let's say consistently make shots from the perimeter. Because I still think that when you look at the roster, I think that's the one thing that's lacking. Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Ashby and I will be here for the baseball show. That is a schedule change. We usually do it on Thursdays. We're going to do it on Wednesday this week because Clemson plays on Thursday. So we got, as of now, we're thinking we'll have the same plan for next week. Want to thank everybody that tuned in tonight. I love it when we get an active crowd in here. It makes them a little better. I don't mind running over 20 minutes like we did tonight. Time flies by. It's exactly what happened tonight. Also want to shout out the sponsor again, A-Glass. 2 locations, one in Florence, one in Sumter. A-Glass, for when you need a glass. They do auto glass replacement. They do repair. You can get yourself a free quote today, myaglass.com. Or better yet, just go see them. Tell them JP sent you. If you can't join us Wednesday, for the baseball show right back here next Monday, 7 p.m. See y'all then.